Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy with Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports, and boy, do we have a show for you today. It's been a day, let me tell you that. Let me take you a little bit behind the scenes here. In case you haven't heard, and I'm sure you have, Bill O'Brien spent 3 weeks in Columbus. He's gone. He's headed to Boston College. This hasn't been officially announced by the Eagles yet, but he's headed to Boston College. I think it was first reported by Pete Thamel. It's done. Chip Kelly is expected to be announced as the next offensive coordinator for the Buckeyes, replacing Bill O'Brien. That'll happen in a matter of a few hours. Tends to be on days like this. I tend to have things going on, or I'm traveling. Today I had to go to the dentist and had to I should have just assumed that this was going to happen, because anytime I do anything, this is what happens. But let's get into it. We're going to talk about Bill O'Brien, about Chip Kelly here, what the Buckeyes are losing, what the Buckeyes are gaining. Later on in the show, we're going to be joined by Bill Kurelic to talk a little recruiting. National Signing Day was on Wednesday. Not a ton to talk about, but I almost forgot. With all that going on, we need a beer. It's beer o'clock at the Murphy household. So there's the crack. It's a Great Lakes milk stout that's been sitting in my fridge for probably way too long. So I decided today was the day to bust it out. It's a little bit stronger than I usually drink on the happy hour. So if I start slurring my words, I apologize. I don't think we'll get that far. But okay, so Bill O'Brien. There's been talks about this for, I don't know, the last week or so. Bill O'Brien got to Ohio State, was here briefly, and then all of a sudden, reports started to come out about the Boston College job, which was opened because Jeff Hafley, the former Buckeye defensive coordinator, left to be the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. And that opened an opportunity for Bill O'Brien, who has been a head coach before, both in college and in the NFL. And then he elected, or the decision was up to him on whether to take it. Now, if you're not familiar with Bill O'Brien, he is from Massachusetts, from just outside of Boston, went to school in Massachusetts. His family, his wife went to Boston College. His family he keeps a house in Boston College and is really tied to that community. His son has a disease that requires a lot of medical treatment, and that is done in Boston. So look, this was not something Bill O'Brien saw coming. This is not something anyone, I think, saw coming. And it was an opportunity that, given his family situation, giving the need to, want, I guess I should say, to be a head coach again, which, I think this is my speculation, but I think he thought going back to Ohio State and being there would give him an opportunity to do that. Well, now he has that opportunity. Say what you will about Boston College in terms of the job and what it offers. We'll see what Bill O'Brien does there. I thought Jeff Hafley did a pretty good job, but decided to get out. So Bill O'Brien, I guess the first question is, what did he bring that Ryan Day was looking for? We've talked about this already on this show, but he was a fit, not because he has some crazy offensive ideas, but rather he checked the boxes of a guy that Ryan Day trusts, a guy that Ryan Day believed in, a guy that he knew could call the plays, run the offense, run Ryan Day's offense, maybe add some tweaks here and there, but he was going to come in and do the job necessary, not reinvent the wheel. And the experience, the fact that he'd worked with Bill Belichick, with Nick Saban, certainly a bonus here. He was, he was the right fit. And Ryan Day even said that when we spoke with him this week, that he was, he was the fit culturally, all this, everything. So Bill O'Brien comes in. He spends 3 weeks in Columbus. This opportunity comes up. Now he heads out. If you're Ryan Day, you quickly want to find someone to replace him, right? You're only a few weeks away from spring practice starting, and now you have to find a new offensive coordinator. Well, as it appears, Ryan Day has found that guy in Chip Kelly. And this, I know, immediately seems to generate reaction one way or the other from Buckeye fans. I've been paying attention the last few days since Chip Kelly's name started to be floated around out there to what fans have been saying, social media, on our message boards, things like that. I think the thing to remember with Chip Kelly is that whatever he's done at UCLA, I'm gonna have a drink of beer here. Whatever he's done at UCLA, the guy has created some really good offenses. And even at UCLA, and I'm going to get to some of the UCLA stuff here in a minute, but you look back at his career, both as a coordinator, head coach, all that stuff. There have been some really good offenses, and he's a creative guy, things like that. Now, has it always worked out? UCLA certainly didn't always work out in terms of the results on the field, but when he got to Oregon in 2007, was an offensive coordinator for 2 years, then moved up to the head coach from 2009 to 12. I think you all remember those Oregon offenses and what they were able to do. When he went to the Philadelphia Eagles, it was a jump for sure to go to the NFL and try and make that work, but he had success in the NFL. He was, let's pull it up here. I had it up earlier, but I guess I closed that tab. His first 2 years in Philadelphia, both years 10-6. The Eagles made the playoffs in his first season. He was fired at the end of the 2015 season after going 6-9, and then in San Francisco, things did not work. He was, having to be some sort of GM and things like that. He was only in San Francisco for 1 year. So focusing on Chip Kelly as an offensive coordinator and what he brings, I think is exciting. We could go back and look at the offenses at Oregon, but I think that's a bit in the past. So let's look at what UCLA did these last couple of years. This last season, UCLA, with a conundrum at quarterback, switching guys and switching back, they still had the 32nd ranked offense in terms of yards per game, averaging 427.1 yards per game. Scoring, UCLA, they were down significantly last year, but in 2022, number 8 in the country. 2021, number 13 in the country. Where I think Chip Kelly can help the Buckeyes the most, rushing the ball, a place where Ohio State has been kind of up and down. He's been in the top 20, I believe, the last 3 years at Oregon, at UCLA, top 15, 2 of the last 3 years in terms of rushing yards per game. His offenses have always been a guy or a group that can run the ball well. And I think the big thing to remember with him is when he comes to Ohio State, he's going to have the kind of talent he hasn't had since he's been in the NFL, since he was in the NFL. And even at Oregon, where they did load up on things, it wasn't the kind of talent, there wasn't an Emeka Egbuka. There wasn't a Travion Henderson. There were some really good, talented running backs and things like that. He didn't have 5 quarterbacks that could play at, pretty much any school in the country. I think that's interesting when you look at that. Now, again, he is going to run Ryan Day's offense. He's obviously familiar with Ryan Day, and that's something we're going to get to in a minute. How does he check the boxes when compared to Bill O'Brien and what Ryan Day needs as his offensive coordinator? Cheers. I think there are a lot of similarities here. Chip Kelly, been an offensive coordinator at the college level. He's coached quarterbacks, which I think if you look at his, if you pull up Wikipedia and look at his coaching career, it doesn't list quarterbacks coach at any of those, but he has definitely coached quarterbacks along the way. So he can still fill that void that Bill O'Brien was going to do. Now, you could make some arguments about how successful he has been coaching quarterbacks these last, handful of years, especially at UCLA. But the quarterbacks at Oregon were pretty good. And again, the talent at Ohio State. Plus, you still have Ryan Day there, right? And it's not like Ryan Day is going to completely abandon working with the offense, working with the quarterbacks. There's still going to be very much a game plan in place. But so has offensive coordinator experience, has done it at a high level in college up to Oregon, had to do it at some lower levels too. Also coached running backs. We talked about the running game, offensive line. He was the defensive coordinator at Johns Hopkins at one point, coached special teams. That's something we obviously know the Buckeyes are still trying to fix. Now, that was all the way back in 1990 at Columbia, but some experience there. So when you look at what he's done in college, he has the experience. He's called plays. He's done those things. So similar to Bill O'Brien, he's been a head coach. All those things are very similar to what Bill O'Brien brought to the table. NFL experience is something Ryan Day mentioned when talking about the things that he liked with Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien had been the head coach to Houston Texans, had been an offensive coordinator with the Patriots. Chip Kelly does not have offensive coordinator experience at the NFL level, but he was a head coach, as I mentioned, from 2013 through 2016 with mixed results. Let's be fair. But Bill O'Brien also had mixed results. And again, you're not bringing Chip Kelly in here to be the head coach. He's coming in to run the offense. Now, what he doesn't have is the experience of working under somebody like Nick Saban, like Bill Belichick. And I think that's something that, Ryan Day really could have used in terms of Ryan Day is still a young head coach. I know it seems like he's been at Ohio State for quite some time. He has obviously, carved out a great start to his college head coaching career. But if you think about where Ryan Day was in comparison to, Ryan Day at this point in his career, in comparison to a lot of head coaches, most guys are just getting their start probably at a lower level. So having somebody with experience on that staff is important, but the experience of working with two of the best to ever do it, I think to give pointers to Ryan Day would have been valuable. Now, Chip Kelly does not have that. What Chip Kelly does have is this relationship with Ryan Day that dates back to when they were, when Chip Kelly was Ryan Day's offensive coordinator at New Hampshire, when Ryan Day was a quarterback himself. I think there are two sides of this coin. Let's focus on the positive first. The relationship, Ryan Day needs somebody who he can trust. And certainly he will trust Chip Kelly, who has been a mentor to him since, he got to the college game, more or less. That relationship has been worked through probably all the different ways you can do it. He played for Chip Kelly. He then worked with Chip Kelly at multiple levels, including in the NFL before coming to Ohio State. So, there are certainly pluses to that. If you then want to flip it to the negative side, Ryan Day has hired another friend of his, another person he's familiar with. This was something that came up a lot when Urban Meyer was the head coach, right? If you hire your friends, how much, will they be willing to push back on things and tell you no? Already Justin Fry is there, somebody who has worked with both both Chip Kelly and now Ryan Day. Now they'll all three be together. Is this the best case scenario? We're going to have to wait and see. I think when you hire somebody like that, you are certainly risking kind of a guy who's just going to say yes to things. They have a relationship, don't want to affect that. Now, I will say Chip Kelly I have never met Chip Kelly, but does come across to me as somebody who's going to push back when he thinks things are not being done the right way. And that may be a good relationship between the two of them in terms of, kind of the push and push back, the pros and cons. I think there is the potential for this to work out really well. There's also the potential that doesn't, but I think the same was true with Bill O'Brien. I'm going to be very interested to kind of watch this spring the dynamic between Chip Kelly and Ryan Day and kind of how it plays out, because it's flipped, right? I mean, when they've worked together before, Chip Kelly was the offensive coordinator, Ryan Day was the quarterback. Chip Kelly was the head coach, Ryan Day was the offensive coordinator. Now Ryan Day's on top. The dynamic will just be interesting to see how, it all works out. I think that we'll just have to wait and see. Certainly the idea of bringing in a mind like Chip Kelly in terms of running this offense is one that is rather enticing. Now, I saw somebody ask in the comments that about Chip Kelly as a recruiter. Obviously, he's done this plenty throughout his tenure, or his coaching career, excuse me. He has had success, especially at Oregon with the way they recruited. Now, it wasn't at the level that Ohio State is currently doing it, but that doesn't mean that he can't get to that level. I also think that when you looked at a guy like Bill O'Brien, his biggest selling point was, I coached Tom Brady. I coached a Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young. When Chip Kelly goes recruiting, it's going to be a different pitch, right? He hasn't coached a Heisman Trophy winner. He did coach Marcus Mariota, I believe, at the beginning of his career at Oregon, but he hadn't become the Marcus Mariota that ended up winning the Heisman and playing against Ohio State in the national championship game. So you don't necessarily have that, but I think that you didn't need this position, this position as offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, to be an elite recruiter. And I think you only have to look as far as Jim Knowles on the other side of the ball. You need to surround Jim Knowles with really good recruiters, right? Tim Walton has done that. James Laurinaitis recently, when he's been able to get on the road, has done that. You just need other guys around him to be able to do it. And then Jim Knowles can be kind of a closer in those situations. That's not to say Jim Knowles can't be a really good recruiter. He just doesn't need to be. That's not what everyone has to recruit, but that wasn't his main job when he was hired. It was to fix the defense. Well, Chip Kelly coming in is kind of in the same boat in talking about recruiting, because he will be focusing on running this offense, coaching the quarterbacks, and then recruiting. Ryan Day, Brian Hartline, co-offensive coordinator Brian Hartline. We assume that won't change now that Chip Kelly is coming in. That was the title he was switched to, pivoted to, whatever you want to call it. He can recruit. Tony Alford can recruit. All these guys, have proven that they can recruit. We're still waiting to see kind of how Justin Fry develops in that capacity, but there have been positive signs in that respect. So I think that you don't need Chip Kelly to necessarily be an elite recruiter. And frankly, he may be an upgrade over what Bill O'Brien was bringing to the table in that. I think Bill O'Brien is probably a better recruiter than people give him credit for, but I don't know if it's either of those guys' favorite thing to do, but I don't think that was what Ryan Day specifically was looking for that role. So we will certainly, keep an eye on how he does it. Bill O'Brien hadn't really gotten out on the road, as far as I understand it. We can check with Bill Kurelic on that when he joins us here in a little bit. But so you're not losing anything there. In that vein, I know there'd been talk about Julian Sayin, the quarterback that transferred from Alabama, and how Bill O'Brien was a pull for him because he had been part of the recruiting process during Bill O'Brien's time in Alabama, Julian Sayan's not going to transfer to Boston College. I mean, it wasn't strictly Bill O'Brien that was the reason that he came to Ohio State. It was the chance to play at Ohio State. It was to work with Ryan Day, the dynamics and culture of that quarterback room that, have been built. And you look at CJ Stroud on Thursday night winning Offensive Rookie of the Year in the NFL. Those are the reasons that a guy like Julian Sayan was coming. So I don't believe you're going to see, guys like that want to leave after 3 weeks of Bill O'Brien. And Bill O'Brien hadn't been, even if he had been on the road, and I'll ask about that. But when Bill Kurelic gets on, but how do he won't have a negative drawback because of that. So Chip Kelly, he'll be able to get in, he'll be able to, hopefully get settled and everything before spring practice begins in a few weeks. We're recording this on February 9th. Early March will be the beginning of spring practice, and away you go. Now, this isn't the way anyone drew it up. I think if you'd asked Ryan Day, the way he put it at the press conference on Wednesday was they thought they had a fastball, and it ended up being a curveball with Bill O'Brien. And this was before they knew for sure what he was going to do. And I think now you settle in with Chip Kelly, and you've pivoted a little bit. Again, as I detailed earlier, they're not the same coach, but they do have a lot of the same characteristics. And the fortunate thing I think with this whole situation is that, it's not like Bill O'Brien got here, got into the program, had really started to ingrain himself, and then this comes up in like April, right? There has been such a short period of time that, it's almost, I don't even know if Bill O'Brien will, be able to put this on his resume, that, he was at Ohio State, because it was 3 weeks, right? So it will be interesting to see how Chip Kelly settles in. The players will be able to get to know him, and how many of them got to know Bill O'Brien? Not a ton. I think that it will be fine, because it didn't last as long as it could have. If this had happened, like I said, in April, then it will be it would have been a whole different story. We'll see how it all works out. I saw a few questions in here about the Chip Kelly stuff I wanted to answer. ASK7 asked, transfer portal opens at UCLA. Maybe there's a right tackle who's interested in transferring to Ohio State. That was something I thought of pretty quickly as well. But Chris Hummer from 24/7 Sports, one of our national writers, pointed out that the spring or the winter quarter, UCLA is still on quarters, doesn't end until May 22nd, which would be after the 1 month window. So transferring out of UCLA right now would be pretty complicated, I imagine. I transferred once in college, and it was already and this was in between school years, and it was a mess trying to figure out what classes and things what credits transferred and whatnot. So trying to transfer in the middle of a quarter would be more difficult now. I'll have to look at the UCLA roster. I don't think there was a offensive lineman that stands out. So I don't know for sure, but what I think would be more likely to happen, if there are any players who do want to follow Chip Kelly from UCLA to Ohio State, it would probably be after spring, I would imagine. And this actually brings up a point, not something I was going to get to, but while we're on it, Ryan Day mentioned this week that they're going to evaluate the tackles that they have on the roster, and if they need to after spring, go ahead and look in the portal again like they did last year, then they will. But they have some guys they like. He admitted that it's a big spring for a guy like Josh Fryer, but equally as big of a spring for Luke Montgomery and Tegra Shabola. And so, I think we tend, and I've said this a few times in various places, I think we tend to forget now that you're still allowed to develop, even in the transfer portal era. Ryan Day is very clear that he wants to be a coach, that he wants a program that recruits high school players, develops those high school players, and sends them to the NFL, and then fills in where needed from the transfer portal. So I think Luke Montgomery is a guy who could very easily step in and be a very good tackle for Ohio State as soon as next season. I'm very high on Luke Montgomery. I think Josh Fryer may make some sense moving inside to guard. I think the tackle experience didn't quite work the way that anyone planned it last year. But he did play well at guard 2 seasons ago when he filled in there, had to start a game, played a large portion of another. So, I had the same thought there about the right tackle position, or either tackle position, frankly. I think if you could find a left tackle who then you could plug right in and then move Josh Simmons, potentially right tackle, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either. But I don't think that that's going to happen right away. Now, if a guy enters the portal that's too good to pass up, they certainly will. If it's a UCLA guy, then, that makes even more sense. But again, it would be difficult, just in terms of academics, which still part of this equation, right? For a guy from UCLA to do that at this point. But I guess it depends on your priorities, right? And kind of how you want to handle it. Jonathan Dickens asked, do you think Chip Kelly will have the special teams as well? No, I don't. He does have, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit of a background in special teams. I'm sure as he's been a head coach and whatnot, he's worked with special teams before. But Ryan Day this week talked about special teams, that he wants to be more involved with special teams. That's part of the reason he's doing this by handing off play calling and handing off some of those offensive responsibilities, is he wants to be more involved with everything. And that includes special teams, which I think is really interesting, because if Ryan Day starts to prioritize special teams, maybe Ohio State special teams elevates. And even before these last 2 years with Parker Fleming and some of the issues that Ohio State had, it still wasn't, at that elite level. Now, there were some punt blocks and things like that. That stuff has been good. But I mean, I think it's back to 2014 since the last time Ohio State returned a kick or a punt for a touchdown. With the weapons that you have in the building at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and available on Saturdays at Ohio Stadium or around the Big Ten, that just is insane to me, that you haven't been able to utilize some of these athletes to get these big returns. So I think Ryan Day being involved in that. Also, I mentioned this when he was hired. Matt Guerrieri, the new safeties coach at Ohio State, the press release said that he would have additional responsibilities or something along those lines. Ryan Day was asked about that this week and said that Guerrieri will indeed work with special teams, which is exactly what I thought those additional responsibilities would be. So I think that's the way they're kind of approaching it right now. There is still this 10th assistant spot open, where where they still have to, or will add a coach at some point. I think the way that Ryan Day handles that will be interesting. The last I heard on anything was that James Laurinaitis seemed the most likely to be promoted. That still has not happened. So maybe things have changed there. There was talk about Ohio State looking to bring in a assistant defensive line coach, which I think makes a lot of sense, kind of given the negative recruiting that happens with Larry Johnson. Then you have his successor in place on staff, but you have to find the right guy in doing that. the right guy, it seemed at one point, was Jason Taylor, who is currently with the Miami Dolphins. The talk has cooled there. Whether that is the door is completely shut on that or not, I'm not sure of. But it certainly seems like the buzz around that and stuff we were hearing a few weeks ago, we are not hearing nearly as much anymore. Ryan Day was asked about that 10th assistant coaching spot and said he was asked this week and said basically that he expects to fill it. It could happen in a week, about a week. I know some people on our message boards kind of took that and did some sleuthing, figured that that could mean somebody will, step in from the Bill Kurelic was texting me, trying to get him set up on here. That people were thinking that this would possibly mean an NFL guy who was coaching in the Super Bowl. I know people on the board had kind of zeroed in on the assistant defensive line coach for the San Francisco 49ers, whose name escapes me at this point. I didn't read it that way when Ryan Day said that. I think, in the past he's thrown out some of the terms like a week, and it doesn't always work out that quickly. So, I imagine that I know that they have talked to several people and, they'll figure it out. I don't think that rules out James Laurinaitis. I know James Laurinaitis is very interested in a full-time position on the staff. He got the chance to go out and recruit for the first time in his career these past few weeks because he was, because the Buckeyes had this opening on their staff after Parker Fleming left. And we saw James Laurinaitis walking out of one of the team meeting rooms just the other day, asked how things went. He said, great. He was out in Los Angeles doing some recruiting, and he really enjoyed it, is basically what he said. So that's a possibility there. We will see what direction the Buckeyes go in, but now one of the two positions that looked like they would be filled or have to be filled was filled. Terry Slusher asked, any idea how soon Chip Kelly might arrive in Columbus to get this started? I would imagine pretty quickly. I think you look at kind of the timing of things. You want to get him in here. You want him to get acclimated with the players and all that. It's there's not a lot of time between now and the start of spring ball. But again, I think it's better it happens now. These conversations didn't just start today, right? I think, Chip Kelly met with the UCLA players, told them he would not be back as head coach, reportedly this afternoon. So, this wasn't the beginning of that. It was conversations that have been going on for quite some time. And at least within a week or so. And so I imagine he is quickly getting on a plane, heading to Columbus, and going to be in the Woody as quickly as he can. Does that mean tomorrow? Maybe they give him the weekend, but you certainly want to get Chip Kelly into the building, talking to players, getting to know the staff, getting to know the playbook. One of the things Ryan Day talked about that Bill O'Brien had already done was kind of evaluating the why you call a package this thing, why you call this, that, the other. And, does it actually make sense for teaching purposes? He said that sometimes they call it, I think the example he used was like, it's week 7 of the season. We come up with something and we call it that because of, whatever has been happening. Well, that may not be the best way to kind of handle, that in terms of teaching it to the next guys, because they don't understand why it's called that. And so an outside guy like Bill O'Brien, and I imagine Chip Kelly will do the same, had started to point some of those things out. And you will you'll get the chance to do that the quicker you get into the program. It sounds like from Bill's text, he's not going to be able to get on, but we'll still talk a little bit of recruiting here. I am not the expert that Bill is, and so we'll have him back on at a different time. But signing day this past week went by without any drama for the Buckeyes. In fact, you may not have even known it was National Signing Day on Wednesday. Ohio State did close out the 2024 class. They did add one more player to the group in defensive lineman Dominic Kirks out of Painesville, Ohio, a player who was committed to Washington, did not sign with Washington during the early signing period as the Buckeyes kind of got interested after losing Justin Scott to a flip to Miami. So they went to a guy who had kind of developed more during his senior year, a 4-star prospect, the number 32 defensive lineman, according to our rankings in the country. So that was really all that needed to be done on signing day. That concludes the class, which in our rankings is number 5 overall. Not the elite classes, the elite classes that Ohio State's had before, in terms of, number 1, number 2, but, average rating, which is, per player, out of 100, the Buckeyes are 92.8. I think only 2 teams, Alabama and Georgia, I believe, are higher. So, based on now Alabama and Georgia, Buckeyes only have 22 commits. The 4 teams in front of them, 27, 27, 28, 28. So, that's why that average ranking is important. But I think what I wanted to talk about with Bill is kind of looking forward to this 2025 class. The Buckeyes already have 8 commits in 2025, led by 2 cornerbacks in Devin Sanchez and Naheem Oford, 2 5-star guys. And the bump that the Buckeyes have started to receive in the way that Tim Walton is recruiting is remarkable. These last handful of classes have sort of been propped up, so to speak. There have been other good players, but the rankings have been helped by Brian Hartline and the wide receivers, right? The wide receiver recruiting has been ridiculous from the Buckeyes. So to see it kind of flip here, and now you've got 2 of the top 6 players in the country, both cornerbacks committed to Ohio State, speaks to what Tim Walton is doing. And look, obviously, what Ohio State's done with cornerbacks under Tim Walton these last couple of years has impacted the way that these high school kids are seeing, the believing in the what's being done defensively. Denzel Burke, obviously, Jordan Hancock coming on last year, Davison Igmanosin after transferring from Ole Miss in the season he had. And then, you started to see it a little bit last year in recruiting with guys like, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong year here. You saw it with last year's class, the freshman last year with Jermaine Matthews and the way he played during the season, during his freshman season. Calvin Simpson Hunt, who's actually the higher rated cornerback in that class, saw a little bit of time, not a ton, but Jermaine Matthews, he started against Penn State and had no issues whatsoever. Then in 2024, you kind of build on the success you had. You get Aaron Scott, you get Bryce West, 2 of the top 16 corners in the class. Aaron Scott just outside the top 50 overall, and Miles Lockhart, who is a top 30 corner, all 4-star guys. So you see it starting to build with Tim Walton there. And then this recruiting class, which, let's remember, we're a long way from when these kids sign, but you have the number 1 corner committed in Devin Sanchez, and you have Naheem Oford, the number 2 cornerback in the class. So you're off to a great start. And Tim Walton, look, this is a guy who played at Ohio State, then went on to the NFL, coached some college, coached in the NFL. When he was hired, it was a big deal that he, had a guy like Jalen Ramsey talking about he may be the best coach he's ever had. So a guy who has within the first, few years of being back in college and coaching at Ohio State really made a name for himself, not only as a recruiter, but also as a coach in terms of the way he develops and uses these players. So I think that's pretty exciting now that you have two elite recruiters on either side of the ball if you're the Buckeyes. Looking beyond that, Ohio State already has their 2025 quarterback, in Tavian St. Clair, a guy who I got to see this summer quite a bit at the camps at the Woody, and really like what Tavian brings. He was not as highly rated then, but I think, playing at a place like Bell Fountain maybe doesn't get seen by as many people as, some other quarterbacks around the country. But once he committed to Ohio State, once Ohio State took that commitment, I think people started to take notice. And now he's up to the number 3 quarterback in the class, a top 12 prospect nationally. So you've got that locked down, and he is, helped to kind of formulate this class. They recently landed a top 5 offensive tackle in Carter Lowe, also from Ohio, up in Toledo. That has obviously been a position that Ohio State has not recruited as well. I mentioned Justin Fry earlier and what's going to happen, or his ability as a recruiter. I think this is a big class for Justin Fry because, now you've established yourself at Ohio State. You've been able to go around and introduce yourself these last few years to these high schools and get to know these kids. It's time to bring in a class of, a more elite class. And I know the Buckeyes are higher on their offensive linemen than the rankings, but this is Ohio State. You should be recruiting Taylor Deckers and Paris Johnsons. Maybe Carter Lowe's that next guy. I didn't mention Blake Woodby, also a cornerback in that top group. Not trying to slight him at all. I was just talking about how it's cornerbacks and not wide receivers there. And another 4-star guy. You got Zaire Mathis, an edge rusher, top 10 player at that position. And then Javin Boggs, Eli Lee, wide receiver Javin Boggs, linebacker Eli Lee, both 3-star guys, but guys that, again, Ohio State sees maybe something in that hasn't been seen by there isn't reflected in the recruiting rankings. I think it's important to have guys where, if you can sign all top ranked guys, great, but Ohio State has had some really good success going out and landing sort of under the radar prospects. And, I think that's always been positive. I saw a few people asking about Dorian Brew in the comments here. Bill obviously would have been a much better person to ask about that, and we will talk about it going forward. The Buckeyes are still very much, as far as I understand it, in the mix with Dorian Brew. Obviously you have 3 cornerbacks committed already, but that does not necessarily mean they're done. You look at what you could or will lose after this year. Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock both gone. Davis Igbinosun, if he has a big season, he could be gone. Now you've filled the cupboard better, but if you can land 3 elite cornerbacks and 1 really good cornerback, I don't think you pass up that opportunity. To really have a top secondary like the Buckeyes have built this year. I think the same is going to be true at safety. After this season, you're going to lose Lathan Ransom. You have 1 more year after this year of Caleb Downs, but you want to start loading up at that position as well. And I think that the Buckeyes have changed the recruiting process and put back the emphasis in on the defensive side of the ball. So we're going to wrap it up. I'm sorry we didn't get Bill Kurelic in here. I hope we were able to at least get you some information on Chip Kelly and kind of the situation there with what happened, why Bill O'Brien left so abruptly, why the flip to Chip Kelly, and maybe what Chip Kelly has done. So I thank you all for tuning in. We will resume kind of the plan as usual next week. I had initially a whole different podcast planned, and then all this news came out today. So thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour, and we'll talk to you soon, Buckeye fans. Cheers.